Welcome to the Vegan Voice. Today I'm going to be discussing the concept of what I call indirect vegan activism, what it is and why I personally think it may, in some cases, be a better alternative than a more direct approach. Firstly, I want to make this abundantly clear. I am not trying to disparage any activists who take a more direct approach. These people do amazing work, and without groups like Anonymous for the Voiceless and Surge doing this kind of activism, I guarantee there wouldn't be as many vegans in the world today as there currently are. I genuinely believe the work of these groups and other individual activists are vital for the movement. However, it is important that we realise that not everyone is going to be receptive to this approach. And if our goal is to increase the number of vegans in the world, we should be open to multiple forms of activism in order to maximise our impact. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, I should probably back up for a second and actually define what I mean by direct and indirect activism. So, what is direct activism? Simply put, this is arguing that an individual or group should go vegan. This may be approached from several different perspectives, but the ultimate goal is for an individual to directly change their behaviour and become a vegan. Indirect activism, on the other hand, would be campaigning for issues related to veganism, without being directly about veganism, such as reducing the environmental impact of the animal agriculture industry or improving the welfare conditions of livestock animals. You may be, understandably, asking yourself, if indirect activism won't lead to an increase in veganism, then is it really worthwhile? I would argue that yes, it absolutely is, and to explain why, I'm going to explain how I myself became a vegan. For the vast majority of my life, I was a heavy meat eater. I grew up in a household where salad was practically a foreign term. Unless it was hidden inside a burger bun, that is. I legitimately struggled to think of a single meal I had as a child that didn't contain some form of animal products. Fast forward about 20 years to when I moved in with my girlfriend, who at the time was vegetarian and had been for most of her life. For the sake of convenience more than anything else, I adopted a mostly vegetarian diet, only consuming meat when at a restaurant or ordering takeaway. This went on for about 4 years, until finally I said to myself, this is dumb. I'm mostly vegetarian anyway, I might as well make a few tiny changes and just become a vegetarian. About 3 months later, I started binge watching documentaries about animal rights and the impacts of animal agriculture on the environment and human health. A few days later, myself and my girlfriend both agreed. We had to go vegan. We simply couldn't think of any reason why we should keep eating dairy and eggs. That was about 5 years ago now, and we haven't consumed animal products since. Now, you might be asking yourself, what the hell has this got to do with activism? And the answer is quite simple. The younger me would never have chosen to watch those documentaries. And if you would have forced me to watch them, then I would have done everything in my power to ignore them, or look for reasons why they were wrong. Simply, I was not emotionally ready to accept the horrors of reality and the part I played in that horror. Once I went vegetarian, however, my subconscious guilt over my involvement was reduced, and I was able to not only watch the documentaries, but also accept what they were saying. Simply put, I had inadvertently primed myself to not reject the facts. And this ultimately is what I believe could be the focus of indirect activism. Slowly moving the public conscience, gradually opening the door to further conversation. Now, this might sound good in theory, but let's think about how this could work in practice. what are some actual conversations we could have on the street? And how could we possibly approach scenarios a little differently? Firstly, let's start with a goal in mind. For this example, we'll pick the treatment of livestock animals. Now, this can be a pretty tough topic to broach with someone who still consumes animal products. Generally, they're just not going to want to listen to the details of how their food is produced. But what if we're not shaming them or asking them to change their behaviours? We're simply asking for a signature. Okay, as an example, here in the UK, there is an organisation called the RSPCA, or the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Now, the RSPCA does good work with regards to the welfare of pets. However, they also provide guidelines for livestock, which is not so good. For example, in their guidelines for quote-unquote free-range egg-laying hens, the space requirements are, and I quote, "Stocking density must not exceed 9 laying hens per metre squared of usable area," whatever that means. To put this in perspective, that's roughly 33 centimetres squared per animal. Now, if you've ever seen a live chicken, you will hopefully realise that this is woefully inadequate. Now, typically most people would assume that free range means these animals spend much, if not most, of their lives outdoors, living happy, healthy lives. Surely that's the entire point of free range, right? I used to think so. Well, as it happens, no. According to the RSPCA and Red Tractor guidelines, free range means they simply have access to the outdoors. Let's take a quick look at the RSPCA guidelines on the requirements for this. The guidelines state that there must be at least one pop hole, aka entryways for the animals, for every 600 chickens. For smaller flocks of 1200 or less, the minimum width of these pop holes is 50 centimetres, though there are some caveats around minimum available widths depending upon the number of birds. Let's put this in perspective. If a barn had about 133 metres squared, with 2 entryways, each 125 centimetres wide, for 1,200 animals, I would be meeting the RSPCA guidelines for free range. That's right, just 2 small doors for well over 1,000 animals. Let me ask you, does this match the public perception of free range? Oh, and just to add insult to injury, yes, the RSPCA admits the removal of chickens' beaks to prevent injurious pecking. Again, does this match the public perception of free range? So, going back to our activism, if I were to approach someone in the street advocating they stop eating chicken and eggs because of the harm involved in the process, some may be open to the idea, but unfortunately, many more would not, and instead of listening to what I have to say, would most likely just become defensive and argumentative. However, if I were to approach someone, asking them to sign a petition to the RSPCA to improve welfare standards of livestock, I believe many more people would be open to the discussion. Hell, they may even be curious and want to know more, as the RSPCA is kind of synonymous with animal welfare here. So, by steering the conversation away from that of consumers' actions, but towards the guidelines of an organisation, we can find a way to impart the horrific truth to someone about where their food comes from without it turning into an argument or a debate. Now, I do not believe these kinds of conversation will prompt many, if any, people to go vegan. However, I do believe that they could be helpful in raising awareness about animal welfare issues, allowing people to face up to the reality of where their food actually comes from, without having to dwell on their own complicity in the process. Check out my last video for why I believe this is beneficial. I genuinely believe that people accepting the reality of topics like animal welfare and the environmental impact of animal agriculture could at the very least help us prime the public consciousness to take further steps in future. Hopefully, some of you will find this technique useful in getting others to consider the impacts of animal agriculture without the typical defensive arguments cropping up over and over again. I'd like to take a moment to thank you for sticking around and listening. I'd love to hear what you think about this topic, so please feel free to leave a comment below and subscribe for more content in future. Oh, and as a final note, I've added a link in the description to a petition from Surge for their Milk This Is Your Moment campaign. It would be absolutely fantastic if you could take a minute to go sign it. And finally, once again, thank you.